Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Richard Ryan, and I am Senior Washington Correspondent for the Detroit News and President of the National Press Club. I'd like to welcome club members and their guests in the audience today, as well as those of you who are watching on C-Span or listening to this program on National Public Radio. The video archive of today's luncheon is provided by Connect Live and is available through the National Press Club website at press.org. National Press Club luncheons are also carried live by many sites on the World Wide Web. Press Club members may access transcripts of our luncheons at our website. Non-members may purchase transcripts, audio, and videotapes by calling 1-888-343-1940. Before introducing our head table, I would like to remind our members of some future speakers. This Friday, on April the 13th, John Hendricks, Chairman and CEO of Discovery Channel and founder of the new Women's United Soccer Association, will address the National Press Club to kick off Saturday's opening of the new league. On Tuesday, April the 17th, Secretary Tommy Thompson of the Department of Health and Human Services will launch his national initiative for organ donations. And on Monday, April 23rd, David M. Walker, Comptroller General of the United States, will be our guest here at the Press Club. And if you have any questions for our speaker, and I hope that you do, please write them on the cards that are provided at your table and pass them up to me. And make sure you write legibly. And I will ask as many as time permits. I'd now like to introduce our head table guests and ask them to stand briefly when their names are called. But please hold your applause until all head table guests are introduced. From your right and my left, we have Nora Bustani. I'm sorry. We have, that's my fault. We have Carol Giacomo of Reuters. We have Nora Bustani of the Washington Post. Donna Leinwand of USA Today. Ms. Yusra Abu Rahib, wife of the Prime Minister of Jordan. Skip Kaltenhauser, a freelance writer. And Her Majesty Queen Rania, the First Lady of Jordan. Frank Okafor, co-chairman of the Speakers Committee and a former president of the National Press Club. And skipping over our speaker for a moment, Bill McCarran of U.S. Newswire and Speakers Committee member who organized today's luncheon. Thank you, Bill. We have Ali Abu Rahib, Prime Minister of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Jill Abramson, Washington Bureau Chief for the New York Times. Hoda Tawfik, Washington Correspondent for El Haram, an Egyptian newspaper. And John Diamond of the Chicago Tribune. Our guest today, King Abdullah of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, is one of a group of new young leaders in the Middle East who are working to build a path toward peace and prosperity for the entire region. His Majesty King Abdullah, now 39, became ruler of Jordan February 7th, 1999, when his father, the late King Hussein, passed away. King Hussein was a legendary figure in the world stage for nearly a half-century, a giant in Middle East politics, and a leader revered by his people. Jordan's strategic location, with borders on Israel, the West Bank, Iraq, Syria, and Saudi Arabia, have placed this relatively small country in the middle of all that happens in that turbulent region. King Hussein worked closely with his eldest son, helping to shape his education and career in ways that would prepare him to eventually lead the nation. King Abdullah often traveled with his father on diplomatic visits, and by his father's side, learned the intricacies of Middle East politics. King Abdullah attended school in the United States, graduating from Deerfield Academy in Massachusetts, where he was a high school wrestling champion, twice winning the New England Championship. He later studied at Georgetown School of Foreign Service here in Washington. Seems to have a few supporters here. Preparing for a military career, King Abdullah attended the Sandhurst Royal Military Academy in the United Kingdom. In the Jordanian Armed Forces, King Abdullah learned to fly helicopters, jump out of airplanes, and combat terrorism. At the time he was named Crown Prince in preparation for his ascendancy to the throne, King Abdullah was a major general commanding Jordan's elite special forces. He is a qualified frogman, pilot, and free-fall parachutist. He also loves auto racing. He began driving race cars in 1982, and a decade later, he was Jordan's national champion. His Majesty is married to Queen Rania, the First Lady, who is here with us today, and the couple have 3 children. Before succeeding his father, King Abdullah enjoyed being able to travel about without the entourage that must accompany a king. One of his fondest memories, he says, is coming to the United States, renting a car, and driving around the country. That means he probably never drove in the Washington area during rush hour and in a rainstorm, because if he had, those memories might not be quite so fond. On his current visit to the United States, King Abdullah met yesterday with President Bush, a leader who also knows something about following in his father's footsteps. Among other things, they discussed the current violence in the Middle East. After their luncheon meeting yesterday, President Bush described King Abdullah as one of the young leaders of the Middle East who has got a good vision for peace. While King Abdullah is a leader with strong connections to the traditions of the past, he is also forward-looking. Half the population of Jordan is Palestinian. He understands, as did his father, that the future of the region depends upon the ability of diverse groups to coexist and thrive together in peace. The late King Hussein was a frequent visitor to Washington, and we had the honor of hosting him as a luncheon speaker at the National Press Club on 6 occasions. At the entrance to the Reliable Source restaurant just upstairs here, there hangs a reproduction of the front page of the Jordan Times, the newspaper of February 8, 1999, announcing King Hussein's death. Before today's luncheon, His Majesty and I visited that spot, and we had a moment to recall a national leader who left such a huge footprint on the world stage. So please, join me in welcoming His Majesty, King Abdullah of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, to the National Press Club for what we hope will be the first of many visits. Thank you. Your Majesty.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a privilege for Rania and myself and for my entire delegation to be here with you today and to address this impressive gathering at the National Press Club. I am grateful for this opportunity of exchange and interaction, and especially thankful for your advice and support. 2 weeks ago, the regular Arab Summit convened in Amman, where leaders of the Arab world expressed their determination to pursue peace, to uphold international legality, and to enhance inter-Arab cooperation. They also charted a novel and pragmatic approach to economic cooperation and integration, one that denotes the awareness of the challenges of the new century. This message was also echoed by the United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan, who stated, half of the Arab world is under 18 years of age. They need jobs, he said. Your challenge should be to help them share in the 21st century. His words could not have been more relevant or timely. During a period when the world is changing in a direction that is still unfolding, our region is also undergoing a very important transition. It is one with wide and deep implications for a mostly young generation that seeks to fulfill the hopes of the future while still being held hostage to the old conflicts of the past. It is a reality where modern templates of knowledge and freedom of thought and expression can easily be outweighed in young minds by extremist calls of hatred and revenge, and by narrow, destructive prejudice nurtured through the daily pictures of the horrors of war and the pain of loss and suffering. It is indeed a critical time when the Arab people, clearly aware at the beginning of the new century of the need to adopt modern technology, find it increasingly difficult to defend an international system that continues to delay justice and condone its absence. It is a turning point when we all must focus our efforts to ensure that the young talent is only harnessed for building new centers of excellence. This is how they can really share in the 21st century. We are the ones who make the choices that would render the promise of their future much more meaningful than the attachment to our past. I belong to a new generation of leaders that has assumed public service in Morocco, Bahrain, Syria, and Jordan. We're not held hostage to many of the past generations' historical issues. Still, we have other, perhaps greater challenges. His late Majesty King Hussein, like many of his counterparts in the Middle East, had to deal with the post-colonial era, working throughout his life to ensure the survival of Jordan as a state that is built on modern and viable institutions. Today we face a different but equally important challenge: to secure a future for Jordanians where they can prosper and thrive. The new generation of leaders fully understands what it takes to guide their countries through the next phase of development. They realize the need to bridge the ever-increasing gaps with others. They also know that we cannot afford to be left behind by a world that is rapidly moving towards economic integration and globalization. And while we're pulled into different directions by those who refuse to change the status quo, and by a populace eager for economic opportunity and political reform, we know that the only way towards a successful future is forward. This dictates a necessary revision of some of our strategies and work ethic. For too long, the Arab-Israeli conflict acted both as a deterrent and an excuse to the political and economic development of the region. In Jordan, we have realized that waiting for the more than 50-year conflict to end before embarking on a process of political and economic reform can only be done at the expense of our own development. While working to achieve peace throughout the many past years, we also started a process of gradual and sustained reform based on self-help measures that were adopted for our own interest. It has already resulted in a major transformation of economic, social, and even cultural aspects. In fact, we're providing a model where political stability, democratic principles, and the rule of law are offering Jordanians the opportunity to excel and to contribute to the development of their country. We have made considerable progress in liberalizing our economic structure and in allowing the private sector to be a full participant in it. Our export orientation has been enhanced with our admission to the World Trade Organization and with the soon-to-be, I hope, ratified free trade agreement with the United States. We are equally determined to chart a new path in our region where economic protectionism will be replaced by open and free trade, and where private capital will be allowed to freely flow through the present boundaries of separation and isolation. Most importantly, we have made a choice to continue investing in the development of our real assets, our human resources. We have made it a priority to secure the necessary means for upgrading educational and training standards. This is the real advantage that will launch our new economic drive, and it will provide the building blocks for the new Middle East. While we have chosen not to use the Arab-Israeli conflict as an excuse for not modernizing the country, its continuation remains a major factor that poses a serious threat to the development of the region. Despite the bold steps taken to liberalize the economic system in Jordan, the absence of peace in the region has adversely affected trade, investment, and economic cooperation, and has dangerously elevated the frustration of people who are tired of war, occupation, and economic deprivation. It has thus jeopardized the success of the entire model. This is why we insist that the Arab-Israeli conflict must end, and end now. Let us not allow the conflict to continue. Let us get the chance to transform our region and break out of this seemingly endless cycle of hatred, war, and violence. We all have a shared responsibility to achieve this goal. Israel must understand that there is no permanent military solution to this conflict, no matter how strong and mighty it is. The only solution is one that would give Palestinians hope that they can live freely without occupation in a sovereign state that encompasses the borders of the West Bank and Gaza, with East Jerusalem as its capital. The two sides came very close to such a solution and seriously tackled political issues which have never before been discussed. The future of refugees, water issues, security guarantees, and sovereignty over Jerusalem and its holy places were all part of the negotiations. And the clock cannot be set back now that the parameters of the solution are clearly in sight. We must urge them to go back to the table and bridge the remaining gaps. The active involvement of the United States of America in bringing the parties together and in helping reach this solution is vital and complements our regional efforts to bring about such an outcome. For its part, Jordan, which has direct interests in major aspects of the negotiations and seeks to defend the right of return and compensation for Palestinian refugees on its soil, will spare no effort in this regard. Agreements with Syria and Lebanon, providing for full Israeli withdrawal from occupied land, should follow if peace is going to be lasting and comprehensive. The Arab world must also address the security needs of the average Israeli and move to accept Israel as a member of the neighborhood. Only then can our region start a new chapter of mutual recognition, acceptance, and cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, the aspirations and needs of a whole generation have been stifled because of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Many have lost property, land, country, and dreams. Many continue to live under occupation and siege. We cannot afford to continue to hold future generations hostage to this past. Arabs and Israelis deserve to live a decent, secure, and dignified life. Therefore, we need to redouble our efforts to end the Arab-Israeli conflict, and at the same time, place the region on a new fast track of reform. We must move away from politics of isolation towards attributes of diversity, equality, and accountability. Above all citizens are entitled to peace and tranquility that would allow for their excellence to shine in an atmosphere that respects them as humans and treats them as such. Only then can they really share in the 21st century. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have a number of questions here. There's three questions here that deal basically with what role you think the United States should play in the ongoing peace negotiations. As you know, that the Bush administration appears to have taken a hands-off approach. And another questioner said that you said on PBS this week that the United States as a superpower is going to be involved in the Middle East whether it likes it or not because of its superpower status. And did you discuss this situation with President Bush during your meetings yesterday?
Thank you very much, sir. I think we have to put the question in its real light. The American administration, there is an impression in our part of the world that America is not interested in pursuing peace or in really taking an interest in our part of the world. That's not true. We all know that. And I think that the present administration has taken a very mature view to trying to deal with the problem. There is a feeling that, and maybe to an extent they're correct, that during the past couple of months of the end of last year that maybe both sides took the United States for granted. So I believe that what the American administration is saying is that, look, before we can stick our necks out, before we can commit ourselves yet again, we need to see that you too, that both sides are serious in moving in the right direction. So I think to say hands off is probably an unfair way of describing the situation. America understands the need to be very close to the region and to try and push the peace process forward. So I believe that what you're seeing is maybe a more behind-the-scenes attitude. And when I hope we can get both sides to sit down together, then America will take maybe more of a overt presence when it comes to the peace process. What we have to understand about the Israeli-Palestinian process at this stage, we're not talking about peace negotiations. We're simply talking about de-escalating the violence. Both sides have gotten themselves into such a vicious cycle of violence that they see it as very difficult to try and break out of that. We have to be encouraged with the meetings that have happened last week and will happen in the next couple of days between the two security groups to try and find some confident building steps. Initial reports are very hopeful. We all have to help them build on those. And I hope in the near future we can find the atmosphere where both sides can sit together again around the peace table and discuss how to move forward. Thank you.
Well, as you know, sir, that President Clinton was so actively involved in the peace negotiations. He put a lot at stake in that. And there doesn't seem to be quite that much emphasis right now. You sort of wish that there had been a different election here result?
What's your next question? Again, there is, I think, the misperception when it comes to the peace process. I believe that people feel that they looked at Taba, that was the last chance. That wasn't. That was part of the process. From Oslo to Camp David to Sharm el-Sheikh to Taba, where the Israelis and Palestinians came closer and closer together to finding a final solution. I think the perception was that there were two things that were happening very close to each other after Taba that made it look that Taba was the last straw. The departure of the Clinton administration and the Israeli elections with the victory for Prime Minister Sharon. So I think the perception was that, okay, none of the players are around anymore. This is a process that has taken many, many years. And I think it's unfair and it's sad if we're going to look at Taba as being the end of the peace negotiations. The paper was put out there. Both sides came very, very, very close. We have to build on Taba. Once we can get the violence down, once we can get both people to sit down around the table and negotiate, let's go back to the closest that they ever got and build from there. So I think we have to be much clearer on the understanding of what actually happened. Taba was not the end. It was part of the process. And I think we have to remember that. And when both sides, I hope, sit together, I think they remember what happened in Taba and use that as a template to move forward.
I take it this individual wants to know if the step-by-step, the slow-going peace process is a chance of better success than what Prime Minister Barak tried when he tried to have a complete solution at one time.
I think so. You have to understand that when Prime Minister Barak was looking at a complete solution, I think that's what we were all looking at. But as the violence continued to escalate, as both sides really lost control of the situation, talking about peace was not an option at that stage. So we're back down, unfortunately, to the basics, getting the small steps of confidence, getting an ability where you can de-escalate the violence to allow both sides an ability to go back to their own street and say, okay, let's give it another try. The other side seems to be committed and wants to move in the right direction. So I think that the only way that they can go now at this stage is to rebuild the confidence, unfortunately, from scratch. But they've started very well last week, and I hope and pray that all of us in the international community will stand by both sides to understand the seriousness of the situation, capitalize on what they achieved last week, and move forward.
This is a similar type question, but asked in a quite a different manner. It says, Your Majesty, when you attended Deerfield Academy in Massachusetts, you became renowned for your record-breaking, split-second pins of your opponents, obviously talking about your wrestling championships. Furthermore, your fondness for speedy action was manifested by your interest in race cars. So in light of your preference for speed, do you find the slow pace of the Middle East peace process frustrating? And I might say that this question was, the name was identified here, submitted by a Deerfield schoolmate, Mr. Rob McDowell.
Yes, I think all of us have been extremely frustrated. I'm the type of person that wants everything done yesterday, and that doesn't only apply to the peace process and regional stability, but also economic reform. We've started the process. As the Prime Minister, I'm sure, can tell you from his own experience, you know, I tend to use this on a lot of people to say, when are you going to be able to move and how quickly can you go? I am an impatient man, but I think at the same time, when we talk about the peace process, there's no other alternative. I can't imagine how we will all live with the feeling that we're not going to move forward. At the beginning of a new millennium, we have the chance to show the world a new, fresh start to our region, and maybe a symbol for the rest of the world. And it's inconceivable that you might get people in different camps that say, well, it's not going to work. Let's wait for a while. We can't afford the delay. The violence has been escalating over the past 3 months. If we don't do something about it, it's going to get worse. And if it gets worse, you're going to drag more people into it. So we're playing with Pandora's box at the moment. And I think the leadership on both sides realize how dangerous they've gotten themselves into. They painted themselves into a corner, and that they better get themselves out of it very, very quickly.
A couple of questions here ask what Jordan might do if the Palestinian-Israeli conflict worsens. And one questioner asks if Jordan might be pushed to the point of breaking off relations with Israel.
I didn't get the last word on the first question.
If what you would feel, or what will Jordan do if the Palestinian-Israeli conflict worsens? And secondly, would it come to the point of breaking off relations with Israel?
I think the significant role that Jordan plays has been always a neutral friend to everybody in the region. If we were to turn away from our friends, I think that would be a tremendous loss of what His late Majesty believed in. The fight for peace, the struggle for peace, that's the tough road. And he told all of us to always take the stronger, tougher challenges. No matter what happens and how bad it gets, we will always be committed to getting both parties and other parties to be able to solve the situation. To surrender or to turn your backs on the problem would be destructive for all of us. So as difficult as it may come to Jordan throughout this process, we have to fight for good, we have to fight for peace, and we will never back down from that responsibility.
Do you believe, Your Majesty, that Yasser Arafat is able now to suppress the violence in the West Bank and in the Middle East?
Sir, we've heard a lot of comments over the past several weeks by certain nations that Arafat has no control in the territories. I personally don't believe that's true. Yes, since the beginning of the Intifada, obviously his influence has declined because there's a cycle of violence, there's death and destruction on both sides that make it very difficult for him to be able to send a clear message to his people. I think he is in control. And I believe that what we have to remember, he is the symbol, he is the figurehead of the Palestinian people at the end of the day. But at the same time, because the violence has escalated, because things are getting worse, Arafat, to be able to improve the situation, needs to be able to give something to his people. When he says, I want to de-escalate, those young commanders, those young people in the streets are going to say, why? Give us an excuse. Give us something that we can build on. And so I hope that as the security negotiations start to improve, as we start to de-escalate, as there's a breathing space given to both sides to be able to take one step back, that'll give Arafat much more maneuvering room and give him something that he can give to his people. We need to be able to do it differently because this is what I've been given.
This questioner notes that President Bush has sharply criticized Mr. Arafat, but has only slightly condemned the settlements that are now going on in the Israeli-occupied territories. And this questioner would like to know, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, sir, I think that there was a mistake that both sides have done in the past and to an extent continue to do. If we're going to look at the past, if we're going to point fingers at each other, then we're never going to get started in the right directions. And there is a tendency by all in the area to point fingers at each other and blame each other. What's happened has happened. There has been tremendous violence, tremendous bloodshed, tremendous destruction. If we're going to look at the past, there's no hope for the future. So to answer your question, I think what we need to do is focus to what's ahead of us, putting behind the differences and the tragedies that have happened, and sit down once and for all as people who care not only about the future of their lives, but those of their children. That's what's at stake here. People think that the peace process is an ambiguous thing. Israelis have to walk out of their buildings carrying weapons all the time. Palestinians live in terror of either economic or political pressure on them. They will never be able to feel that there is a future for their children unless they put this difference beside them. So if we're going to continue in the next couple of months sort of saying each side is to blame, I'm very worried that we'll never be able to get ourselves out of it. Let's focus to the future. Let's build on what is happening now, and let's get this thing over and done with once and for all.
You have such a strong feeling about how and why we should end the violence in there. And do you feel that your vision for peace is different from that of other leaders in the Middle East?
I don't think so at all. At the Arab Summit, it depends how people wanted to look at the statement that came out of Amman with all the leaders of the Arab world, whether the glass was half full or half empty. Yes, there was some criticism on the violence done by the Israeli government towards the Palestinian people. But the second part of the message, and that's the important part of the message, is that the Arab countries, the leadership in the Arab world, wants the Israelis and Palestinians to resolve the differences and move ahead. The Arab world wants to have peace with Israel. And so I think this is what we have to build upon. Thank you.
Will Jordan participate in current and future resolutions being considered by the League of Arab Nations to boycott Israeli goods?
I think that those that understand the Arab League and any declarations, they're non-binding. In other words, each country has the ability to decide how they're going to deal with Israel by themselves. So it's for them to decide how they're going to move forward in that respect.
This question notes that they understand that Israel is preventing the delivery of medicines for Palestinians by making trucks unload or reload supplies. And they want to know, has Jordan asked Israel to stop handling this, hindering the transportation of medical aid?
There has been difficulties from the start of the Intifada. Jordan's unique position of having relations with both countries to the point when discussions are made every now and then about bringing down the level of relationship between Jordan and Israel. It is President Arafat and the Palestinian people that say, for God's sake, that relation is extremely important. It's because we have that relationship with both sides that we've been able to get medical supplies into the West Bank, that we've been able to get doctors and field hospitals to be able to avert tremendous crises that are happening on the ground. There has been difficulties. There has been problems where medical supplies, where the wounded have been delayed in getting to the right treatment centers, which has obviously escalated the risk of survivability on some of the injuries that have been sustained. There is a security concern, but they know that we have good intentions, and whatever the problems have been, we've been able to work them out.
Would you describe for us, please, how you view Syria's role in the peace process?
Well, again, I've said this for a while. President Bashar is a man that wants to move his country into the global economy. He wants to improve, get his people back on their feet. He does want to move ahead with peace and stability for the area. The problem that we face at the moment is the main crisis is that of the Intifada and the problems between the Palestinians and Israelis. And until that is resolved or at least de-escalated, it's very difficult for Syria to be able to move in that direction. President Bashar has a vision for his country, a good vision for his country. Here's a young man that wants to be able to give a chance for the people to, as we do and say in Jordan, put food on the table, to improve the social standings of his country. And he's working very hard to be able to do that. And I believe it's incumbent on all of us to be able to stand by Bashar and give him all the support that he can. He has the vision, he has the ideas, he has tremendous challenges ahead of him. He's got a long way to go with regulations, with laws, with being able to adapt the economy to be much more open. And I think it's of vital interest to all of us, including the United States, to support him in his endeavors.
Yet, this one question notes that, the Syrian president made a belligerent speech at the Amman summit and wondered if you might comment on that.
Well, I think when you come to the Arab summit, every country has its own views of things, and sometimes the positions of the peace process, you have to understand the frustration that has been felt over the past 3 or 4 months. Arabs on a daily basis see Palestinians being killed in the streets. Now, I know that the violence is going both ways, but we're faced with over 450 Palestinians dead, thousands of them wounded, and it does create a sense of frustration in the Arab street. And I think that sometimes that reflects in the statements that the Arab leaders have or their positions when it came to the Arab summit. But again, I think we need to look at the glass as being half full, and that all the Arab countries were calling for the peace process to resume as quickly as possible between the Palestinians and Israelis, and to have peace with Israel and have Israel included as part of the neighborhood.
Do you think that has Mr. Arafat sufficiently prepared the Palestinian people for the sacrifices that will have to be made if a peace agreement is finally reached?
I think so, sir. The Palestinians, better than anybody, understand what's at stake. Again, I think there's a sense of tremendous frustration because both sides came so close to resolving their difficulties. And I think that the Palestinian people are willing to sacrifice to be able to have their rights returned to them and to be able to live in peace and prosperity.
This question notes that Israel and Iraq, if they were to have a military confrontation, what would Jordan's position be?
There's an old joke that Jordan's between Iraq and a hard place. That's probably the best way of describing that problem.
Excuse me. Talking a little bit about the Iraq and the sanctions, I know that's something that you feel very deeply about. Did you speak with President Bush about that, and what do you think might be the result of the sanction question?
Well, sir, there's, again, at the Arab Summit, there was a great sense of feeling between the Arab countries that we need to find a mechanism that relieves the suffering of Iraq and Iraqi people, and we had hoped to resolve that issue at the Arab Summit. In our discussions, again, with our colleagues here, I think there is a genuine attempt to try and solve the problem. And the American administration is working on a policy now that has a more open-minded approach to try and tackle the problem of the tremendous, deplorable state of living that the Iraqis are going through at this stage. We will see, I presume, the policy come out in the very near future. But I think the hearts are in the right places to try and find a solution as quickly as possible.
Do you expect the Bush administration to strongly back the Iraqi opposition in pursuing a change in Iraq, and do you support such a strategy?
Again, Jordan from day one has always, and this is something that we all learned from His late Majesty, King Hussein, Jordan has never been interested in getting itself involved in other people's issues. When it comes to the opposition, I don't see, I don't agree with the weight that has been put to it. It surprises me that that such a weight has been put towards the opposition, and that there is an attitude that they're a solution. I don't think they are particularly. That's my own personal opinion.
This questioner notes that yesterday that U.S.-made missiles were used by Israel to bomb Palestinian refugee camps in the Gaza. Was this a discussion you brought up with President Bush, and what do you think about such use of U.S.-made weapons?
All I can say, sir, is I wasn't aware of that happened. I'm sure when we get back we'll get a bit of clearer picture, but it sounds, it doesn't really make much sense. But,
Fair enough. How about trade? Trade is a big issue, of course, between the United States and Jordan, and are we moving ahead with the trade agreement? Republicans up in the Hill, I suspect, object to the labor and environmental questions in the pact. What do you think are the chances of a trade agreement?
I think so. The chances of an FTA with the United States is actually extremely good. We have tremendous support for the FTA, not only by the administration, by President Bush, who, in all his conversations with me, even before I met him, I was very pleased that he actually started the conversation with, I know how important FTA is for you and how committed I am to make that happen. Again, in Congress and with the Senate, both Republicans and Democrats were very, very sincere and very warm in their reception to have an FTA move as quickly as possible. There is some complications between the Democrats and Republicans, but I came away feeling that in their hearts, both sides want to see the FTA move as quickly as possible.
Can you tell us what Jordan now exports to the United States?
Through the qualified industrial zones that we've established in certain parts of the country, the main product line at the moment is textiles. I think the export was close to 100, was it? About 100 million.
I know you think this may be going on fairly long, but we're supposed to be here until 2 o'clock because the television goes till 2, and I know you're getting anxious. Can we continue? Or?
As you wish.
That's fine. Thank you. This deals with something that you did talk about in your speech, but it's such a question of importance. Jerusalem, and there's a couple of questions, and one asks, what do you feel would be a suitable compromise on Jerusalem? And another one says that what can be done to help the general public and the Arab nations and Israel understand each other's passionate commitment to Jerusalem and why they are so concerned over that issue?
Well, obviously, not only the historical but the religious significance of Jerusalem touches the hearts of Muslims, Jews, and Christians the world over. But again, if I can go back to what happened in Taba, I think there was a tremendous understanding of both sides of where they needed to go. And when you consider that the subject of Jerusalem was taboo before Camp David, I think we have to commend both sides for really being very forward-thinking on trying to resolve the problems. I hesitate of making any comments because at the end of the day, that's left for the Palestinians and the Israelis to discuss. Obviously, we support both sides in trying to resolve the problem as quickly as possible. But people standing on the sidelines always make the mistake of making comments that sometimes make it difficult for the parties that are trying to engage and solve the problem, more difficult by erroneous statements that might be made by others. So I think if we can get them back to the peace table, Taba was very close. We just need to go that extra yard. May I just, I think at this point, I just wanted, just to get a break from the questions, I guess, but we're at a crossroads in the Middle East, and I might want to be able to throw a challenge out to our friends here in the United States. If you looked at American foreign policy in 1945, when the Second World War was over, due to the problems between East and West, there was a long-term outlook on how to solve the problems of Europe. In a way, a great American, General Marshall, came up with what was called the Marshall Plan that rebuilt Western Europe because there was a problem with the East. The map ran pretty much from north to south. But over many decades, you managed to bring the Europeans together. You managed to make them look to the future. You managed to bridge the gap between those that have and those that have not, to the point that people sitting over the other side of the fence, the old saying that the grass is greener on the other side, was actually true. And as a result, you won the game. I believe that we're at that crossroad in the Middle East. There are many young countries that are striving to globalize their economies, to move in the right direction, to increase social freedoms, to be able to give education a tool to everybody to be able to better their lives. We're at that crossroad now. You were successful. You made it work in Europe. I was wondering, could that be possible in our part of the world? I'm not talking about assistance or aid. I'm talking about supporting young countries that understand the message of the way the globe or the world is going, the globalization of the economies. Invest in us to be successful. Invest in us in support and in spirit. Because there are a lot of people looking at what is happening in Jordan, what I hope is going to happen in Syria, what's happening in Morocco, what's happening in Bahrain. If we succeed, then many people in the Middle East will say, the grass is greener on the other side. There's a tremendous burden on our shoulders to get it right the first time round. If we don't get it right, then those that want to live in the past will be able to say, see, that they don't know what they're doing. This is not the right way of going. And therefore, we'll be marking time for the next couple of decades. You made it work in Europe. Work with us to try and make it work in the Middle East. You did have a long-term policy in Western Europe. I just hope that there'll be leaders here in the United States that can look at our part of the world, which is so significant for stability and for future prosperity of the whole area. See how you can make it work. Come up with a long-term plan that gives us hope. Not only the countries that are moving in the right direction, but the people living in countries that are really marking time at this moment. Thank you.
That was a very powerful message you just delivered to the people of the United States. I wonder if you delivered that same message in just as powerful and eloquent terms to the President Bush, to Vice President Cheney, and other political leaders you have met?
We had many technical issues to discuss. I figured that this would be a better forum than any to actually start the conversation. So with such a wonderful audience and with the coverage that we might get, I figured that this would be the platform. It has been mentioned to obviously certain officials in the United States government beforehand. But I think this is the first time publicly that we'd like to address this issue and hope that there is another General Marshal out there that would understand what needs to be done and be able to take a look at our part of the world and make the same success of what happened in Europe.
Given the importance of travel and tourism to the economy of Jordan, what would you say to the people about the safety and security for tourists who might want to come and visit your country?
A lot safer than living in Washington, I think so. Jordan has always been known to be a very stable and free country. I wish, I don't know if our American ambassador, William Burns, is in the room, but instead of me answering that question, if he's here, I'm sure that he'd stand up and say, please come to Jordan, it's safe, and you'll have a wonderful time in that wonderful country.
We're getting closer. Given the unease over events in the West Bank and Gaza and the effect on your economy, are you inclined to postpone the parliamentary elections that were scheduled later this year?
Obviously, I think that the democratic process needs to take its course. This is very, very important for Jordan. There is no doubt that the instability and insecurity of the area does cause some concerns. My main concern is to make sure that elections are, at least on my watch, and I know that this has been done before, but I want to guarantee that it is transparent and fair. And that takes a bit of homework and a bit of groundwork to be able to make sure that we can bring that about. There is looking at amendments of the law to make the election process, I think, more modern at the parliament level. I hope that they can resolve this problem. If not, we're going to have to go back to the drawing board. But yes, we're committed to parliamentary elections as quickly as possible.
Given the message you delivered just a few moments ago, do you think that the United States press is covering the situation adequately and accurately?
I presume you mean about the peace process.
That's correct.
Yes. I think you have to understand that with the internet and the television, the whole world watches each other, and we do watch many countries in the Middle East are tuned to all your newspapers and all your television broadcasts. I think some of the comments that I've heard in our part of the world that there is not a balanced approach to the coverage of the problems there. At the end of the day, you are the press and you are the reporters. You know how balanced the statements are. It's not for me to pass judgment, but there is the feeling in our part of the world that the reporting is a bit biased.
Would you describe, please, for our audience what your relationship is with Saddam Hussein?
President Saddam, I had obviously during the Iraq-Iran war, where if you remember history correctly, the West was supporting the Iraqis in that fight. I had, as a young officer, several occasions to go over and take a look at how the campaign was going, and at a distance, in the presence of His late Majesty, I had the time to meet him. Since the late 80s, I think 88 was probably the last time that I had an opportunity to see the man, but again from a distance.
You've sort of made news when you have assumed a variety of identities in Jordan. As I understand it, you've disguised yourself as a taxi driver, a bureaucrat, except in other occupations to meet the subjects, the people of Jordan. Can you tell us, this question has actually 3 questions here. What was your favorite disguise? How effective were these outings? And would you advise other kings, monarchs to follow your example?
I'm not going to tell you what my favorite disguise is, because people are out there to try. You know, we go out on every month or so when I hear that there's an area to be investigated, and it takes a life of its own. It's a bit like citing Elvis. The people think that they see me all over the place in different disguises. There's a story of a government tomato processing plant that helps the farmers in the north get their tomatoes processed as quickly as possible. Well, that particular day there was a line of about 60 trucks, and most of the drivers had been waiting at the main gate for hours on end, and the civil servants there were not really being very helpful or very sympathetic. And I don't know whether somebody thought they'd seen me or there was somebody who used a very ingenious way of doing it, but as he pulled up to the gate, he said, "I think the king is driving the truck behind me, or one of the trucks behind me in a disguise." Well, the gate opened very quickly, and the farmers were processed in about 45 minutes. So that was the main message of getting out there, not only getting to know what the problems were, but to send a blunt message to people that you are responsible. I think that there was a saying in Jordan that if a civil servant thinks that the guy in front of him with a beard or whatever he was wearing might be the king, then he teaches everybody as if he was the king. And I think that was the message to the civil servants. And I think for the most part, people got that. I still use it because it's a good way of getting around. The security are much more low-key, because they realize to make this work that they're going to have to be a lot less of them, and so it gives me a chance to get out. I hadn't driven a taxi for a long time. That was kind of fun. But it is a tool, and one that gives you a chance to interact with people where they feel much more relaxed. But I think we also built a reputation of wanting to know what the problems are. I spend more of my times now going to the rural areas and the poor villages where I sit down with the people and find out what their problems are. And for general, people want to say the right thing. They want to be constructive in their advice so that they can help me to make their lives better. It's a good relationship, and one that I continue to move or to try and aspire to. Disguises happen every now and then, and we'll continue to try and keep people on their toes. Sometimes the government starts to sweat a little bit, but I think it's part of a team. We want to solve the problems of Jordan, and sometimes if you feel that people are not going to tell you the truth, then there's other ways of doing it. Okay.
Well, before asking the last question, I have something here for you. I would like to present you, Your Majesty, with a certificate of appreciation from the National Press Club for your appearance here today. Hope this is the first of many. and a National Press Club mug that can go on the wall someplace. That your father, I think, has 6 of those. And the last question, actually, I would like to make this, there's 2 questions here that maybe you could ask or answer. One asks perhaps the best advice you received from your father. And maybe lastly, can you tell us what is your favorite Arabic saying and or blessing?
My father's attitude to life was that you always had to take the high road. Those of you that had ever met His Majesty know how he was so much larger than life. He looked at things in a way that most of us would ever hope to be able to look at. He had, I think, a very strong attitudes towards God and religion. And he was the type of man that I think whatever the challenges, whatever the problems were in his life, always slept well at night, because I think he always went out of his way to do the right thing. I think that's what we all learned, not just members of the family. I think everybody in Jordan. He was larger than life to all of us because he raised himself above all the pettiness that sometimes happens in societies and in regions. And unlike anybody I've ever known, he didn't want the best just for himself or his family or his country. He wanted the best for everybody. Those are pretty high standards to live up to. One that not only that I try to aspire and hope to make him proud, but I think Jordanians in general feel that he set a standard for all of us. And that's why you're seeing Jordan move the way it's moving, because that message, his legacy, what he wanted for his country, we understand that message. We know what he wanted. And I think not only I, but I think my family and Jordanians, in the long run, in their hearts, I think, want to make His Majesty very proud of the way that we're heading. Any sayings or I think I'll throw it back the other way. What I don't like to hear, and what is the most unpopular thing that comes to my ears, is when somebody says it can't be done. That used to drive me crazy when I was a soldier, and it's been driving me crazy when I've been in the government, but I think people understand the message. It may be difficult, but anything can be done. If you have the right heart and you have the right commitment, no matter how difficult it is, you can make it. And so when somebody says it can't be done, I think that in the Jordanian vocabulary, I've noticed in the past year and a half that they don't use that statement very much. We need to always think positively, and I know that we're going to make it. We've rebounded from a tremendously difficult situation. His Majesty, as I said, was Jordan. He was not only our king, he was the father to all of us. And I think that having that spirit and having that vision that His Majesty had is in our blood. And therefore Jordan is going to make it. And Jordan is going to make its mark in the region and in the world because of what His Majesty taught us and what he left in our hearts. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I wanted to thank you, Your Majesty, for your time and frankness to spend the day with us like this. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming today. And I'd also like to thank National Press Club staff members Melinda Cook, Pat Nelson, Joanne Booz, Melanie Abdel-Dermat, and Howard Rothman for organizing today's lunch. And also thanks to the NPC Library for their research. Now I'd like to ask all of you to remain seated, please, until His Majesty King Abdullah and his wife and the entourage have left the ballroom. Thank you very much. We are adjourned. Is a leader with strong connections to the traditions of the past. He is also forward-looking. Half the population of Jordan is Palestinian. He understands, as did his father, that the future of the region depends upon the ability of diverse groups to coexist and thrive together in peace. The late King Hussein was a frequent visitor to Washington, and we had the honor of hosting him as a luncheon speaker at the National Press Club on 6 occasions. At the entrance to the Reliable Source restaurant just upstairs here, there hangs a reproduction of the front page of the Jordan Times, the newspaper of February 8, 1999, announcing King Hussein's death. Before today's luncheon, His Majesty and I visited that spot, and we had a moment to recall a national leader who left such a huge footprint on the world stage. So please, join me in welcoming His Majesty, King Abdullah of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, to the National Press Club for what we hope will be the first of many visits. Thank you. Your Majesty.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a privilege for Rania and myself and for my entire delegation to be here with you today.
Our guest today, King Abdullah of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, is one of a group of new young leaders in the Middle East who are working to build a path toward peace and prosperity for the entire region. His Majesty, King Abdullah, now 39, became ruler of Jordan February 7, 1999, when his father, the late King Hussein, passed away. King Hussein was a legendary figure in the world stage for nearly a half-century, a giant in Middle East politics, and a leader revered by his people. Jordan's strategic location, with borders on Israel, the West Bank, Iraq, Syria, and Saudi Arabia, have placed this relatively small country in the middle of all that happens in that turbulent region. King Hussein worked closely with his eldest son, helping to shape his education and career in ways that would prepare him to eventually lead the nation. King Abdullah often traveled with his father on diplomatic visits, and by his father's side, learned the intricacies of Middle East politics. King Abdullah attended school in the United States, graduating from Deerfield Academy in Massachusetts, where he was a high school wrestling champion, twice winning the New England Championship. He later studied at Georgetown School of Foreign Service here in Washington. Seems to have a few supporters here. Preparing for a military career, King Abdullah attended the Sandhurst Royal Military Academy in the United Kingdom. In the Jordanian Armed Forces, King Abdullah learned to fly helicopters, jump out of airplanes, and combat terrorism. At the time he was named Crown Prince in preparation for his ascendancy to the throne, King Abdullah was a Major General commanding Jordan's elite special forces. He is a qualified frogman, pilot, and free-fall parachutist. He also loves auto racing. He began driving race cars in 1982, and a decade later, he was Jordan's national champion. His Majesty is married to Queen Rania, the First Lady, who is here with us today, and the couple have 3 children. Before succeeding his father, King Abdullah enjoyed being able to travel about without the entourage that must accompany a king. One of his fondest memories, he says, is coming to the United States, renting a car, and driving around the country. That means he probably never drove in the Washington area during rush hour and in a rainstorm, because if he had, those memories might not be quite so fond. On his current visit to the United States, King Abdullah met yesterday with President Bush, a leader who also knows something about following in his father's footsteps. Among other things, they discussed the current violence in the Middle East. After their luncheon meeting yesterday, President Bush described King Abdullah as one of the young leaders of the Middle East who has got a good vision for peace. While King Abdullah is speaker, and I hope that you do, please write them on the cards that are provided at your table and pass them up to me. And make sure you write legibly. And I will ask as many as time permits. I'd now like to introduce our head table guests and ask them to stand briefly when their names are called. But please hold your applause until all head table guests are introduced. From your right and my left, we have Nora Bustani, We have, that's my fault, we have Carol Giacomo of Reuters. We have Nora Bustani of the Washington Post. Donna Leinwand of USA Today. Ms. Yusra Abu Rahib, wife of the Prime Minister of Jordan. Skip Kaltenhauser, a freelance writer. And Her Majesty Queen Rania, the First Lady of Jordan. Frank Okafor, co-chairman of the Speakers Committee and a former president of the National Press Club. And skipping over our speaker for a moment, Bill McCarran of U.S. Newswire and Speakers Committee member who organized today's luncheon. Thank you, Bill. We have Ali Abu Rahib, Prime Minister of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Jill Abramson, Washington Bureau Chief for the New York Times. Hoda Tawfik, Washington correspondent for El Haram, an Egyptian newspaper. And John Diamond of the Chicago Tribune. Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Richard Ryan, and I am Senior Washington Correspondent for the Detroit News and President of the National Press Club. I'd like to welcome club members and their guests in the audience today, as well as those of you who are watching on C-Span or listening to this program on National Public Radio. The video archive of today's luncheon is provided by Connect Live and is available through the National Press Club website at press.org. National Press Club luncheons are also carried live by many sites on the World Wide Web. Press Club members may access transcripts of our luncheons at our website. Non-members may purchase transcripts, audio, and videotapes by calling 1-888-343-1940. Before introducing our head table, I would like to remind our members of some future speakers. This Friday, on April the 13th, John Hendricks, Chairman and CEO of Discovery Channel and founder of the new Women's United Soccer Association, will address the National Press Club to kick off Saturday's opening of the new league. On Tuesday, April the 17th, Secretary Tommy Thompson of the Department of Health and Human Services will launch his national initiative for organ donations. And on Monday, April 23rd, David M. Walker, Comptroller General of the United States, will be our guest here at the Press Club. And if you have any questions for